In today's video, you're trying to lose some body fat and you're interested in fat loss drugs, and I got a damn expert at my house, so we're gonna talk about it. Hey guys, what's going on? This is Paul Ravella from ProPhysique.com, and if you don't know who this man is, you are living under a damn rock.
Then get out. Speaking of the rock, he's right over there.
He is over there. Well, the other day he visited my video, and Layne was in town, and I thought, well, I want a real celebrity in the video, so.
Oh.
Yeah, got a butter.
Flattery will get you everywhere.
They got a butter him.
That's
For
true.
those of you that don't know, every now and then they'll ask me, like, do you know Layne? It's an odd
No.
question.
It owes me $5.
Well, we're gonna have to bleep out that because this is PG rated. But the point of this video is to talk about fat loss drugs, weight loss drugs. They are all the rage right now. And there might even be some positive benefits of these things.
Yeah.
But I'd like to get your perspective because this was my first coach. He taught me everything I knew about nutrition, everything I knew about sustainable approaches to fat loss. He never put me on a meal plan. He taught me macros, even though it was painful at times. And it created a lifestyle where I was able to lose body fat, build muscle, and sustain that for a long time. And this is really where I run into a problem when you give somebody a solution that's just a shot.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the science of what's going on because I don't even understand all the things that semaglutide and some of these drugs are doing.
Yeah. So you picked it out. Most of these drugs are different brand names of semaglutide. So what's semaglutide? Semaglutide is what's called a GLP-1 mimetic. GLP-1 is a hormone secreted by your gut in response to feeding, and it acts on your gut tissues as well as your brain to basically tell you you're full. So in the brain, it acts on the hypothalamus to decrease your appetite, and in the gut, it activates things like baroreceptors, which give you a sensation of being full. So why don't they just give GLP-1? Well, GLP-1 has a very, very short half-life. It's only a few minutes, whereas semaglutide has had a couple of the amino acid residues on the protein chain changed to where its degradation is now much longer. And so it stays and has a biological activity that's much longer, so you're not having to take it all the time. Okay. You know, I think most semaglutide injections are like once a week or something like that. So it does appear to work extremely well for weight loss.
Yes.
When we look at the clinical trials, the average weight loss in obese people is about 15% of their body weight, and they do keep it off as long as they're on it. And I mean, as far as weight loss interventions go, it is the best we've seen so far.
Okay.
Like, so when we look at long-term outcomes from lifestyle interventions or exercise or diet, we don't see results this good. Now, part of that is because people do not sustain those lifestyle interventions, right? So people do a keto diet or they do a whatever diet, and then they go back to eating how they did before and they gain back the weight. So when you look at, you know, short-term 3 to 6 month lifestyle interventions, you see pretty decent results.
Yep.
Not as good as what you see with semaglutide. But if you look out 2 years, you don't see that great results because people tend to drift back to what they did beforehand. Now, semaglutide, you can argue, is just forcing a lifestyle change because you have very little appetite.
Right.
In fact, it slows gastric emptying so much that some people are reporting what's called peristalsis, which is basically like, you know, really slow digestion.
Has there been vomiting, I've heard?
Reflux, nausea. So this stuff, you are not hungry. Now, there is some anecdotal reports and there is some possible science to back this up that long-term, it may kind of rewire your brain and the way you think about food. Like I have talked to a few obese people who used it, who lost weight, and then now report that they just don't think about food as much as they used to, even though they're not taking it anymore. So those are kind of the positives to it. Very, very powerful appetite suppressant.
Yeah.
Now, what's interesting is I have had people say,
you know, I need to take Ozempic because my metabolism is broken or I have a slow metabolism.
if that's the case, Ozempic is not going to help you.
Or the opposite.
Yeah, semaglutide is not going to help you because it does not increase your metabolic rate. All it's doing is making it so that you eat less. And really interestingly, for probably 50 years in weight loss, most of the focus was on how do we increase energy expenditure? How do we increase calories out? How do we boost metabolism? And what we're actually finding is the most powerful effects are on the appetite side.
Okay.
And really, if you're looking at things that boost metabolism, when they do it to an appreciable degree, they're dangerous. So you look at something like DNP, which is a drug that drastically elevates metabolic rate.
Okay.
It is very dangerous and people die from it every year.
Okay.
You get cooked from the inside. So it does appear, as far as safety goes and on which side of calories in, calories out make the most difference, it actually is the calories inside and appetite that seems to make the most difference. Now let's talk about the downsides. First one is some people have raised the concern of loss of lean mass. So if you look in the research studies, people who use semaglutide, of the weight they lose, about 30 to 40% is lean mass, which sounds like a lot. But if you look through the research studies in people who do not exercise, which these studies were in people who don't exercise, you see about the same.
Okay.
You see anywhere from 20 to 40%.
So it's not necessarily that they're just taking in less protein because they have less hunger. It's just
well, and that's the other aspect to this, is if you are less hungry, if you really have a drastically reduced appetite, you're probably not selecting high protein foods as your first choice.
My concern would be, okay, so you're talking about severely restricting calories, losing lean body mass. If they were to come off this drug, and I don't know how long it's been on the market and how much post, adding this medicine in data there is, but that sounds like a recipe for body fat overshooting, which we've seen in competitors before.
So that is something I was going to touch on, which is basically, I think the main problem with this drug, because you hear people say, well, what about thyroid cancer? Because there was a study in rats where they give a really high dose and they saw thyroid cancer. I'm not really concerned about that, because if you give a high dose of something to lab animals, you can see weird stuff with almost anything. But I do worry about people who are taking semaglutide, but also not getting coached on lifestyle intervention.
Sure.
Because what you ideally want to use this for is a springboard for people to, get some momentum, get going, not be hyper fixated on food. What you don't want to have it do is somebody goes from eating 3,000 calories a day down to 1,500, but they're still making the same food choices. Right?
When they do eat, they're still grabbing high calorie kind of junk foods that aren't really nutritious.
Correct. And that's going to be a problem, because when they come off, people tend to get in habits and behaviors. And I think one of the things we've talked about when I first kind of, I don't want to say came up with, but sort of was popularizing flexible dieting, is I had this idea. I'm like, oh, well, people just follow macros and you lose weight. And then you realize not everybody's a robot like you and I. And most people have habits and behaviors that are tied up in the way they eat and interact with food. And so if you don't address those dietary habits, if you're just giving something that reduces appetite, you're right. When you go off that, there is a very high probability that you're going to gain it back. So I think the way I see this working, I think it's a really great tool, especially for overweight and obese people who are type 2 diabetic or insulin sensitive.
Where your weight loss is a bigger concern than the repercussions of the weight loss, right? Like where you're in such a bad place, because the concern I would have for someone that's, say, pretty fit and just wants to lose 10 pounds going on this is they might be setting themselves up for lean body mass loss and a big rebound. If
you're in pretty good shape and you're just using this to lose 5 or 10 pounds, I think you're an idiot. Is what I would say. I realize that's strong verbiage, but I think that if you're in good enough shape, you can do this through lifestyle. You've already shown that you have those habits and behaviors to get to where you are. You just need to go to another level. And I don't think the juice is worth the squeeze on this sort of stuff. Now, I think, again, this can be a great boost, because if you look at people who are obese, most of them have attempted multiple weight loss trials and for whatever reason have failed or relapsed. And a lot of them, you and I, when we go to do a fat loss diet, we have zero doubt that if we hit our macros, we will lose body fat.
Sure.
But so many people don't trust the process because their experience has been the process doesn't work.
Sure.
And so if somebody can take this and they get some buy-in and feel like, oh, this is actually going to work, for a lot of people that's motivating, right? And so I do think it's a useful tool for overweight or obese people to get them moving towards that, but it has to be done with also being coached on lifestyle interventions. And so, I'm a big fan of, I've talked to people who own or are starting medical weight loss clinics who are trying to do that, who are trying they're going to combine it with not just semaglutide, but they have to get nutritional counseling as well and coaching as part of that. I think that's great. But if it's just a doctor, hey, you got type 2 diabetes, here's your script. In short term, it's going to help them, but long term, unless they stay on it, it's probably going to cause relapse.
The same idea that you give somebody who's broke $10,000 and they're going to be broke within a few days, right? Versus teaching them the skills, which is something that you and I have been preaching for more than a decade now, you much longer, is that you have to have the skill set. The real value, the first time you gave me a prep diet and I looked at it and said, oh my gosh, how do I accomplish this? That first couple weeks was where I really learned the value of the nutrition in a food item and stopped just looking at good and bad and said, oh, this actually works for me. And that diet changed the way I looked at food forever. I always tell people now, I look at food like the Matrix. I don't look at good, bad. I look at like numbers. Where are my numbers at for my goals? If I want to eat some pizza, if I want to have a beer, if I, those things no longer seem like a way that I'm going to get prevented from reaching my goals. My concern with this approach is another black and white, off and on, binary. I'm either on semaglutide or I'm not.
Yeah.
So if you do an intervention where you do a combination of those and you need it, I'm all for it. I think that's one of the things, like people will say like, oh, you guys don't like people who do fasting or who do carnivore diets. Those interventions, they're about behavior change.
Right.
Fasting is people that are usually probably snacking around the clock, learning to just stop eating. And that intervention is good for them. It doesn't mean that fasting or carnivore is better than any other type of caloric restriction. It's just teaching that person maybe a behavior change.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at, there was actually a recent, probably like 4 or 5 years ago, a meta-analysis of 14 different popular diets.
Yeah.
And they looked at long-term, do any of these diets outperform each other? And there was no difference, right? They were all equally bad, quite frankly, at inducing long-term weight loss. And there was no real difference in adherence between the diets. It was pretty poor across the board. But when they took those people and they stratified them by compliance, regardless of diet, right, and did a regression based on compliance, what you saw was a linear effect. The more compliant they got, the more weight they lost and kept off.
Sure.
And so what that really says is whatever lifestyle intervention feels easiest for you is probably the one that you should do. And so many people, you've heard it, they'll say, I did intermittent fasting, didn't even feel like I was dieting. I wasn't even hungry. Or I did low carb and I wasn't even hungry. I did plant-based, I wasn't even hungry. That's fine. But what the problem is people feel the need to kind of like justify why their thing is the best thing.
Yeah,
and so
I call it tribalism, like fitness tribalism. Like my way is the best way, and then oh, you agree with me, then now we're a gang, and then everybody that doesn't do it our way, let's attack.
It'd be like if we said, well, flexible dieting boosts metabolism and like all, which it doesn't.
We've never said.
Yeah. And so I think the point is like, whatever works for you is great, and different things for whatever reason trip that compliance algorithm in different people. But don't assume what was easy for you will be easy for somebody else, because for us, flexible dieting was the thing. Like if you told me, hey, you can have whatever you want, you just got to hit these macros, I will automatically, as my calories reduce, make different food choices. But not everyone's like that. Some people, tracking is extremely stressful for them. They'd rather just eliminate a food group, or they'd rather just time restrict, whatever. Those are all perfectly reasonable tools, but there is no real magic.
So if you guys haven't been following Layne's channel, go over there. He does amazingly in-depth analysis of studies, of research, of what's coming out. Also, I feel like you and I should get on a podcast because we could talk for an hour, and I'm trying to keep this to a short video. So comment below, A, if you're subscribed to Layne, and B, if you'd like to see us on a podcast, either mine or his, or we'll just start a new podcast. All right, talk to you guys tomorrow.